Hey, kia ora. Helen Brahms here, coming to you live from Surprise in Arizona. Hope you're all having a super fantastic sparkling day. Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast, number 1502, a day of remembrance. So it suddenly occurred to me earlier on this today, like mid-afternoon, somewhere around there, that it was 9/11. I hadn't needed to use the date at that point. At that point, I was going through my day, getting my tasks clicked off and everything else, including going to the hardware store, getting the screws, coming back doing work for a client, getting on the chat and working on the chat and emptying more boxes. And one of the books I actually uncovered, one of the books I just put on the bookcase was it was a life published book about 9/11, and I had a quick flick through it, and I thought, oh, there's some pictures in here I've never seen before. Mind you, I bought the book as a memorial thing, and I haven't actually read through it. But looking through it, it had first responder stories. It had photographs of Ground Zero personnel. It had on the inside covers pictures of all the people who passed away that day. No, not all of them. Some of the people that had passed away that day. And I didn't, like I said, I didn't have a detailed look. I've never cracked the book open before. I just saw it and thought that would be a good one to have, just as a reminder about today. And so it's got me thinking about, it's a day of remembrance and remembering what happened on this day back in 2011. So that's what, 22 years ago. Wow. That's wild. No, yeah. 2001, sorry, yeah, 2001. Yeah, it's 22 years ago. Wow. Hard to believe it's been that long. But, I always go back, and when I do remember that it's 9/11, I'm sort of like reflecting on, remembering what my story of 9/11 is and how I found out about it, which Brad thought was hilarious, that I thought that it was a movie on TV. I said, well, what did you expect? I come on, they got planes flying into buildings, and I thought it was some TV thing. I thought you were having me on. And because, I called him, finally got through to him at work and it was that day, and I'd been working night shifts at the hotel. So I was the night auditor that week. I was front desk supervisor, but that week I was acting as night auditor because my night auditor was away on vacation. And that was a very interesting week. Working in a hotel with that all going on was interesting. But, it always reminds me of, have we written down our memories of that day? That is an event that had a significant impact on this nation. Have you written your story about what happened on 9/11? What you remember of it? Where were you? What were you doing? What were the next few days, weeks, and months like for you? Because future generations are going to come across this, and they may have a book that just has other people's memories in it, and they may go, what was your memories, Grandma? Or what was your memories, great-grandma? What was my second great-grandmother's memories of that day? Because when I find connections in history to my family tree, I'm wanting to know, what is my ancestors' stories that go with this event? Were they in the area where the event took place? And when I look it up and find out where they're living at the time, thanks to census reports, I can see that they may have been in the area. They were in an area where an incident took place, or it could be a client's tree that I'm researching. And I come across a date on one of them, and I'm like, why does that date so familiar? So I look up the date and I go, oh, where did that incident take place? And I'll have a look and go, oh, that wasn't far from where they were living, or that was right where they were. That was in the area where they were living. I wonder if there's anything online or anything that I could research that has their story about what that incident was like. And a lot of times you can't find that information. Yes, it may. Well, excuse me. I don't know what she's protesting about. She's got another 20 minutes till we go for a walk. But I always think about, what were their experiences living through that, experiencing that historical moment? What was it like for them to live through that? What was your story experience on 9/11? See, the only thing I can tell my grandsons about their grandfather was that the morning of 9/11, he welcomed me when I came home that morning, because I came home from my night shift, and he left late for work that day, and he was driving in, as the plane hit the Pentagon. He was going around the 405 as the plane, he saw the plane, and he saw the smoke go up when the plane hit the Pentagon. And when he got to where he was working at the Naval Research Base, they got put into lockdown, and they turned off all the networks, and they were broadcasting through on the terminals. I think it was CNN News that they were broadcasting through the terminals so that everybody could stay up to date with what was going on. And that's what he was doing when I called him later on to that day, because I want to know what time he was going to be home, because we had some paperwork that had to be signed and returned. And I thought, well, if he gets home tonight, we can sign it, and then we can put it in the envelope. I can leave earlier to swing by FedEx to drop it off, and then continue on to the hotel. Take this big wide circle to get to the hotel, take the long way, and changing up the route as we talk about sometimes. And I thought I could do that, so I called him, and I finally got through to his desk, and I said, well, what time are you going to be home tonight? Because we need to sign this paperwork, and this is what I was thinking I would do, and all that. And he goes, haven't you heard what's happening? I go, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, the World Trade Center's no more. I go, as in the Twin Towers in New York? He goes, yeah. I says, yeah, right. He goes, no, seriously. He said a couple of planes flew into them. I'm like, no. I didn't actually believe him. I did not believe him. I thought he was having some prank on me or something. I did not believe him. He said, turn on the TV. So I turned on the TV and saw the news about it. It was like on every channel. And I'm like, oh, this is just a movie channel. Let me try another channel. Any channel I went to, it was live on every channel. And that's when it hit me. It was like, oh, crap. And then he tells me about the plane that went down in Pennsylvania. And then he tells me about seeing the smoke go up when the plane hit the Pentagon. And I'm like, they hit the Pentagon? And he's like, yeah. I says, as in that big Pentagon-shaped building that's right across the river from DC? He says, yeah. And like, I was my brain wasn't computing very well. I just woken up. I've been on night shift. I just woken up. And it took me over. And so I finally realized that what he was saying was true. And that kind of shook me up a little. I was kind of numb for a little bit, but it also shook me up a bit as well. And then I remember trying to call the hotel because I was on night audit that night. It took me over an hour to get through to the hotel that I worked in. And the hotel I worked in was a Residence Inn, which is an all-suite hotel. It was a great place to work. We had a great team and everything. And our hotel happened to be right next door to the Red Cross head office. And so I finally got through. And basically what they'd done at the hotel is that what Marriott had done this complete blackout on all hotels in the DC metro area. I don't know how far out the blackout went, but basically nobody, not even those with the super duper premier top of the line rewards card that gives them a room no matter what. That one, it was the blackout that included that card gets blacked out as well. So they couldn't turn around and say, well, I'm a platinum, I think it was a platinum member, so you have to give me a room. No, we didn't that day. It was complete, total blackout. And I'm like, what the heck? And I said, do you guys need me to come in early? They're like, yes, please. Basically, since that happened, Marriott went slammed down and shut down all hotels from taking reservations. They weren't allowed to they couldn't make any reservations in the reservation system. Because all of those that had gone to the airport to fly home that day were now turning around wanting to come back to the hotel that night. And we're like, nope, sorry. And every spare room that we had in our hotel was taken up by Red Cross, bringing their people in to help coordinate with what had to be done on their side. So I ended up going into work early that night. They said it's just been so crazy. They had all the salespeople were answering the phone. The sales team was answering the phones. The assistant general manager was answering the phones. The general manager was answering phones. Anybody who didn't have anything to do was answering a phone. But they still had the housekeepers making up the room and that because they knew the Red Cross people would be coming in. And so I got into work. I don't even remember what time I got to work, but it was earlier than 11 o'clock because my shift went from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. And I know I was in earlier that night. It was mayhem. It really was. The phones did not stop ringing. They finally started quieting down around 10 o'clock at night. But there were people everywhere. Now, normally when you go into the Residence Inn, you've got that nice lobby area. You've got the gatehouse area, which has the seating and the tables. They serve breakfast in the morning. There's also a TV on in there. And ours was kind of in a room off the side of the foyer. There were a lot of people in there. And we actually kept coffee going the entire night, which we never did. We never did that except for that night. But there were always people coming, and people coming down in their pajamas and their bathrobes, and because they couldn't sleep, they wanted to be around people. And the TV was on what, I don't even know what news channel it was. It was on one of the news channels. But people were coming down and sitting there, and they were talking quietly. They weren't yelling or they weren't yelling or talking loudly or anything else. They were keeping their voices down. I had people come at the front desk just unloading on me and how they were feeling about this and what it meant for them as, working for it, whether they were going to get home that weekend or not, because we still had people that were in house that week, and they were wondering how they were going to get home and everything else. And I was like, I just stood there, listened to it, commented every now and again. But I will put it this way: I have never had such a busy night audit as far as people interacting with me go. Normally, I go in there at 11 o'clock. It's quiet. There's like nobody in the lobby area, nobody in the gatehouse area. There's just the security guard and he would be doing his patrols. And I would have the doors locked, and we still had the doors locked, so you still had to use your keys to get in. And we had no reservations coming in that night. And usually you don't see any guests. You might see a guest or two who comes back to the hotel late. You might get a couple of check-ins who are late coming in. But that was basically it. And this night it was busy as far as there was a lot of people around. And I was just sort of like, this is weird. I felt like I was on a day shift, like either close to the manager's hour in the evening or at the breakfast hour in the morning, when there's a lot of people milling around and talking and chattering and that sort of stuff. And yeah, it was a crazy few nights, because I was there for the next 3 nights, I think it was, I was on. And the nights were still busy. People would come down even after 9/11. They were coming down on the 12th, the 13th, and just hanging out in the gatehouse area just to be around people. They didn't want to be in their rooms by themselves at night. And so they'd come down and talk with those. And there were people still there. There was a lot of people still there at 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. Some of them were still there when breakfast was being set up. So they figure rather than going back to their room, they'll just wait for breakfast and then have that and head back to their rooms and get ready for their day. But some of them no longer had any work to do, because the businesses that they were working for had to close because of 9/11. What happened and everything else. So they were just basically hanging out in a hotel for a few days. They couldn't get flights home. There was no rental cars to be had. They basically had no way to get home, and really no way to get to work either. And their works were all closed, because most of them were working in downtown DC, which was closed for a few days. So they were just hanging out in the hotel and just basically having a mini vacation, and not being able to do much except, the gatehouse area was always had people in it, and they'll just be sitting there chattering away about what was happening. Some of them were from New York, so we're trying to get hold of family back in New York to make sure everybody was okay. There was a couple of people who actually worked in the towers, so of course they were concerned about family members that were also worked in the towers, and colleagues and friends and all of that sort of stuff as well. But yeah, it was a very interesting time from that perspective. So I always encourage people, when you start talking about historical events like 9/11, is take the time to write down your memories about it, so that future generations can look back and see that, yes, there was this incident that happened in New York City. There was an incident that happened in Pennsylvania. There was one that happened in Washington, D.C. How were they all linked? But not just that, the ripple effect that had on an entire nation. Some people will turn and go, oh, yeah, well, we lived in that and we were impacted because of blah, 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 blah. How did a 9/11 impact your life when it happened, when it occurred? Were you traveling and suddenly got stranded at some airport somewhere because the airports got closed down? Were you in mid-flight and they made emergency landings or something? I don't know. I can't remember what they did with the regular commercial flights that were up in the air at the time. What was it like for you being on commercial flights and suddenly being diverted somewhere because you had to land and get out of the skies, because they weren't wanting any planes to be up and flying after that? How did you, if you were in one city on a business trip, how did you manage to get home? When did you get home? How did you get home? Because if you flew into the city, how did you get back home again while the airports were closed? So what were your memories of that day? How did the 9/11 impact your life? Just your day-to-day life? How did that get impacted? Ours was impacted by the fact that Brad's work was closed for a couple of days before they'd let them back in. I think he was off. Actually, I think he was off for the rest of the week. They finally let him come home at like 2:00 in the afternoon. And then I think they stayed closed the rest of the week while they were evaluating and figuring things out as to what they were going to do security-wise and all of that sort of stuff. There were some businesses that were closed for several days. How did that impact your daily life? I mean, I just kept going to work and doing the night audit things, but my night audit shift changed because there were so many people just wanting to hang out with others. Yes, they wanted to watch the news. They wanted to see what was going on. They wanted to catch up with everything that was happening. But at the same time, they didn't want to do it by themselves. They wanted to have people around them in order to do that. So that's where they came down to that area that we have at the Residence Inn. And they just sat there and talked and had the news on. TV wasn't even on very loud. I could barely hear it at the front desk, and I wasn't that far away from it. I was probably about 30 feet from it, and I could barely hear it, which was fine with me because they were repeating a lot of stuff. And then, of course, they brought in all the specialists and the experts and that sort of thing, and all the reporters on the ground. And so I was kind of filtered out of that for a while, which for me was fine emotion-wise. I was taking care of my mental health at that time. And I was seeing a therapist at the time, and when I went to my therapist, she says, how much of the news have you been watching? I says, well, I work at a hotel, and this is where the TV sits, and it's been on the entire time. It hasn't been off since this whole thing happened. And there's people always coming down and talking about it. She says, you need to start filtering yourself and protecting yourself. And I was like, okay. But yeah, it was a very interesting time. So have you written down your thoughts, your memories about that day so that you can pass that on to future generations? Leave it behind for future generations. What was your experience? What other world events happened that had an impact on your life? Have you written down your thoughts about that? I know I've written down my thoughts of King Charles' coronation, about that. Where was I? Where was I when I heard the news that the Queen had passed away? And what did I think of the funeral that they had for her? I put down my thoughts about watching the funeral that they had for her. And then wrote down my thoughts as I was watching the coronation. I was writing down my thoughts at the funeral. I was writing down my thoughts, even though I still sat there with a box of tissues that I went through a lot of those tissues in that box. Because, she had been a figurehead that had been in my entire life. She had reigned for 70 years. I'm only 56 years old. She had been a big part of my life, living in a country that's part of the Commonwealth as well. So we get to hear a lot of news about the Queen and her family and all of that. I'd watched her kids grow up. I'd watched her kids get married. I'd watched them all had children. I watched them grow up, and now they're all having children. So, that's been a big part of my life, and had a lot of impact and influence on me. And there's certain things, there's things I liked about the Queen and the way that she would deal with things and comment on different situations and things like that. And always like the Queen's Christmas message was always one of our things that we used to like to sit and listen to each year, and we recapping the year and what she was thinking about the years coming up and stuff like that too. So write down that when major things like this happen, write down your thoughts about it. Did it have an impact on your daily life? What did you it's kind of strange now that we have a king. I mean, I've had the Queen for 56 years, and now, well, actually it was 55 years because it was before my 56th birthday last year. I'd had the Queen for 55 years in my life in some way, and now all of a sudden she'd been replaced by a king, and it's like, But the thing that kind of gets me about the king, that the king can't ascend the throne until his mother passes away. And I'm like, so she never really gets to see him be king and see what a good, whether he's going to be a good king, a bad king, give him some advice and stuff like that. She never gets to, and it's like when King Charles passes away and William takes over, there's going to be the same thing. He would never be able to see what sort of a king his son will be. So I kind of feel a little sad for them in that situation. That it's the day your parent dies, you're immediately taking over from them. It's kind of weird in a way. But anyway, that's enough from me. I'm out of here. So go write down your memories of major events like 9/11. Where were you? What happened? Did you know anybody that was on any of the planes, in the towers, in the Pentagon? when the plane's hit and that sort of thing? Were you actually in the buildings when the plane has hit? Have you written down your story? Because future generations will be curious as to what, how that impacted your dash. So anyway, that's it. I'm out of here. Go have a super fantastic sparkling evening, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. And it is the second Tuesday of the month, so we will be having Nicole joining us tomorrow. And I think, don't quote me on this, but I think we're going to be talking about protein, as in protein powders, protein shakes, what to look for, what are the good ones, what are the not so good ones. And it's going to bring up talking about reading the labels, which is one of her hot buttons. So I'm looking forward to that one. So we'll catch you guys tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Pacific. Hey, konara.